Welcome back. Well, we've got a lot to get done today. The first thing that I'm doing is ripping a couple of pieces 2.5 inch wide out of our 3/4 inch stock. And we're going to use this as a support across the back of the bench on that so-called backsplash to support the top itself. So we need to get going. Let's do it. Okay, I'm inside the bench now, but this is a good place to do this. And what I want to do is I want to put this right across this backsplash, even with the tops of the side braces. And I want to make sure that I get this perfectly even. So I'm going to clamp this side. I'm going to come down here and clamp this side. A nice tight fit here. And then, of course, when I put that side in, this one came out a little bit. There we go. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure we're lined up in the center. So I'm just going to use my square here and tighten it up right there at the end. Check it at this end, and that's good. And then check it here in the middle, and we're actually... this board has probably got just a little bit of bow to it. So I'm going to pull this down and clamp that. Yeah, there we go. Make sure this is good. There we go. And then I'll recheck that. And this will make sure that we have our top perfectly level. Okay, looking good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill pilot holes. I'm going to countersink the holes, and I'm going to put screws in. But this time I'm only using 1.25" long screws. And the screws that I had to get stainless steel an 1.25" this time are square drive screws. But that's fine. We'll still countersink those in. They're not going to show, and they'll hold this together. I'm going to put a little glue on this as well, so let's get started with that. Alright, I've got a little glue on here. I've got my holes pre-drilled, and the countersinks are done. And now all I got to do is just put this in position and screw it into place. Now, question came up, how do you know when your countersink is deep enough? And that's actually pretty easy. You'll get a feel for it just by looking at it, but if you're not doing countersinks all the time and you're concerned about getting the depth just right, there's a really easy way to check it out. And that is, after you've done your countersink, turn the screw around and put the head in. And if the head goes all the way into the countersink, it's going to be beneath the wood surface and out of sight. It's going to work just fine. So I'm going to clamp the ends where I know that I'm in good shape here. And I'm going to get these 2 end screws in first. And then here in the middle where this board was bowed just a little bit, I'm going to pull this down, get it lined up, get a clamp in there. And I'm going to get this middle screw in next. And then all we got to do is just put these other 2 screws in and we're good to go. After I get this done, I'm going to do the same thing on the other bench, and then we'll get started on our top. And there we go. Okay, we've got the cleat in the back to hold the top. That's installed and ready to go. But before we start fabricating the top, we need to make what I'm calling the sub top. And let me explain what that's for. This is going to be so tricky. You're going to love this. Got a trash can. And this is going to sit down in here on the sub top below the top of the potting bench, and this will be where you can keep potting soil. So when you're repotting a plant or planting some seeds or whatever, you can just remove the lid from this section, scoop out the topsoil or the potting soil that you need, and go right back to work. And sitting right next to that, we're going to have this kitty litter box. And that's going to go underneath the top as well. But this section of the top is going to be like a grate. It's going to have spaces in between it so that when you're working on potting a plant and you inevitably spill some dirt, it'll fall through into this. And when it's time to clean up, you can just pick this up, dump it into your container of potting soil, and you're all cleaned up and ready to go. So let's see how we're going to make the sub top to fit these two pieces. Okay, so inside between the cleat in the back and the front apron on both of these benches is exactly 20 3/4 inches. And the overall length on the inside is 52 3/8. So I've just decided to basically do it in thirds, meaning the first section is 17 inches, the second section is 17 inches, and then whatever's left over is down here at this end. And rather than make solid pieces out of cedar, I'm going to build squares. Now this particular one, when it's all clamped up, you can see it's 20 3/4 by 17 inches. But I've used 3.5 inch stock on these two pieces, and 5.5 inch 1x6s, 5.5 inches wide on the outside pieces. And the reason for that is because of this bow in here being rather pronounced on this particular trash can. And I needed to make sure that I had plenty of wood to catch. Once this is all glued up and ready to go, we'll simply trace around this and make a mark. And then this lip is a little over 1/4 inch in thickness, just a little over. It's about 1/4 inch on the sides and about 5/16 on the end. So after we trace it in, then we'll mark inside that 1/4 inch, and that's where we'll cut it out. And we'll just use a jigsaw to cut that out. And if we need to enlarge it someplace, we can just use a rasp or some sandpaper, and we'll make it so that this trash can sits down inside there and sits on this lip. Now with the litter box, it's not nearly as pronounced the curve, it's more square. So I can use 3.5 inch stock all the way around and put that on here and do exactly the same thing. And interestingly, the lip is about 1/4 inch on this as well. So once again, we'll trace it out, then run a line 1/4 inch inside the trace, and we'll cut that out with a jigsaw. And that's how we'll make our two sub-top assemblies to hold these two pieces. Now, let me show you how to get these dimensions just right. Now, we know we wanted to make them 17 inches wide. Yeah, let me show you on this one. It's probably a little bit easier. So our 17 inch width is this. So just cut that 17 inches, and as long as they're exactly the same, it's fine. If it's 17 1/16 or something like that, it's not going to hurt you. So get those two pieces cut at 17 inches. Then drop your clamp on the floor, and then to get your 20 3/4 inch measurement, put these two pieces together, okay? just like that. Take your tape and put this edge, set it at 20 3/4, right on the edge of that. And then, if you'll look over here on this side, read this dimension. And it turned out to be 13 13/16. So I cut both these boards at 13 13/16. And when I put it all together, it is exactly 20 3/4 without a lot of fuss and muss. So that's a good way to do that, and it'll work out for you perfectly every time. And that is exactly 20 3/4. Okay, I've moved the camera in a little bit closer because there's another important thing that I want to show you, and this is actually pretty important. So let's take a little bit of time. What you want to do, actually, you can use your combination square and get this exact. But what you want to do before you start assembling this is lay this up here and look at your joints here. Now, since we're going to be cutting this out, we certainly don't want to cut into a screw. But where I can, I want to use a couple of pocket screws, if possible, to strengthen this assembly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark here, and same way over here and here. And that'll give me the location to drill pocket holes so that they don't interfere with the saw when I'm going around and cutting this out. The same thing will be done with this assembly, but with this assembly, now this one's obviously going to have a lot more weight in it because this is going to be the one that's going to be holding all the potting soil. So on this one, by using the 1x6 stock, 5.5 inches wide, I'm going to be able, I haven't got this perfectly lined up because it's not clamped, but you'll get the general idea. Once I get this together and evened out, as you can see, I'll be able to get 2 pocket hole screws in here and in here, and that'll really help hold this weight. Okay, so the first 2 of our sub-top supports are done. The other 2 are in the clamps drying. But what I want to do now is trace out for this trash can on this one support piece. And what I did start with was to try to get this as centered as possible. And one of the things I found that made it pretty easy was to measure along the line of this joint and get that measurement equal on all 4 sides, and it kind of helped square things up. I hated that I couldn't get a perfectly square trash can, but it is what it is. So I'm going to draw around here carefully, try not to get any wacky doodle scribbles outside the line that's going to throw me off. I'm putting some weight on this thing to keep it from moving. And I'm trying to keep the pencil at the same angle all the way around so that I sort of get a good even mark. And I want to make it heavy enough to be able to see. It's going to be where I cut here, it's going to be kind of out of sight for the most part. So if it's a little, you know, ragged, it won't be the end of the world. All right, so there's our traced out part. And now what I need to do is I need to come in here 1/4 inch and make a second line, and that's actually going to be the cut line. This line here, I'll just wind up erasing it. And I need to come just in here, and I'm going to kind of have to do that by hand. And that's going to take a couple of minutes, but I'm going to do it as carefully as I can. And then we'll cut just inside that line with the jigsaw. And then if we need to enlarge it a little bit, I can use some sandpaper or rasp or something and kind of enlarge it as necessary. Could also use an oscillating spindle sander. That would be a pretty good way to do that. So let me get this done and we'll start cutting this out. All right, so now what I've done is I've come to my workbench and I've put a couple of 2x4s on edge and I've clamped this up here so it doesn't move. Now I will have to move these clamps a little bit as I swing the tail of the jigsaw around, but I've got 4 clamps on it now. 3 will hold it just fine. And what I want to do is cut on this hand-drawn line on the inside. And I'm running the jigsaw real slow and basically have no oscillation to the blade at all. It'll cut a little less aggressively. Should be something I can do with this. Oh well, maybe not. Okay, so now we can unclamp it and see if this is going to fit. All right, after cutting out the opening and making sure it fit, what I've done, I set my combination square at exactly 1 inch. And I came off of the top brace exactly 1 inch all the way around. Now, temporarily, I've just put some C-clamp or some spring clamps there just to hold it in place to get an idea how it's going to fit. But this goes in just like this, and then our potting soil container drops in just like that. And then we will have a top piece that sits on top of these, and it'll cover this up when it's not being used. And when you need to get in there and get some dirt, you can just lift the top off, reach in, scoop out what you need, and go right back to work. So this is going to work out pretty good. Now I need to cut out the one that's going to go right over here, and then we'll mount them both into the bench. And by the way, if you were wondering, way back in an earlier video, had a little bit of bow in this board. I actually kind of pulled it together with a clamp so I could get everything squared up. And as you can see, once this square assembly and the next square assembly are installed, all of this is going to be self-straightening. And this too is going to give a great deal of rigidity to the bench overall. Exactly like we did for the potting soil container, I've taken the rectangular piece that we built and I cut it out for the kitty litter box, which is going to be our catch for when you're actually potting, and that drops right in there. So this will be your primary workspace on the garden bench, and we're going to have slats with spaces between them, so that as you're working, the dirt can fall through here, and then when you're finished, cleanup will simply be boom, boom, dump it in there, and you're good to go. Exactly the same. This is set up 1 inch below the top. All right, so I've got to do that for the other one and get that done, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to attach these to make sure we get a nice rigid connection that's going to help us out from any racking on this table. Okay, in order to make the supports for the sub-top assemblies that hold the trash can and the litter box, we need 1 piece of 1x4 stock, 6 feet long. Now, that's if you're building 2. If you're only building 1 of these tables, you can get by with a piece that's just 3 feet long. Now, of course, that 1x4 stock is 3.5 inches wide, and it really should be jointed on one edge, so it's a little less than 3.5 wide, but that's okay. What we want to do is we want to rip 2 pieces out of this that are 3/4 of an inch wide, and we're going to use the piece that's left over. So let's get to ripping. And you really need these supports for ripping a small stock like this. It's really the only safe way to do it. This is called the hand over hand technique. that aside. And I'm going to make a chalk mark along this edge that goes against the fence. And there's a reason for that. You'll see why in a minute. And we'll rip this piece now. All right, now this is our leftover piece, and in my case, this worked out to be 1 11/16, just a smidge over, and that'll be just fine. And it should be straight enough that it won't really matter. So now we can get to work on putting the braces in. All right, after ripping out these 3/4 inch cleats, the next thing to do is to cut them to length, and you want to cut them to 34 inches. And the reason for that is because both of our mounting plates, the one for the trash can and the one for the litter box, are 17 inches edge to edge. So we want to make that 34 inches long, and you want to mount those flush with the bottom of the apron on the back and on the front. Now the key here is to make sure that the distance that's left over from the cleat to the top, where the top is going to be resting, is at least 1 5/8 inches, all the way up to 1 3/4 inches will be fine, but a minimum of 1 5/8 inches in here. And that's really important. If you don't have that, just adjust the height of this down a little bit lower. But on mine it worked out perfectly flush at the bottom, and I've got 1 5/8 inches, just a smidge over 1 5/8 inches between here and here. After you get the glue on, clamp it in place and let these set up. Then after the glue has set up, come back and put in some screws. Now be real careful and measure from the end over to 17 inches, which is dead center in the middle of this 34-inch piece, and make sure you don't put any screws immediately adjacent to or close to that center mark. And the reason is because we're going to take a piece of this leftover material after ripping the 3/4 inch stock, cut that to length, and fit that right here in between the two cleats, and make it flush, glue it, and screw it into place. Now I'm going to use pocket hole screws because I was able to adjust my pocket hole jig to be able to get pocket holes drilled in the two edges. Hopefully you'll be able to do that as well. If not, if you're having difficulty with that, you can get one of those little portable clamp on things that just clamps on the board, and you can drill, and that'll work just fine. Then use this to position on your center mark, glue and screw that into place, and that's going to be the support for the two supports for the trash can and the litter box. The middle of those will fall right on the middle of this board, and that'll keep them from sagging, and it'll keep them level. So I'm going to get that done, and we're ready to move on to the next step. All right, our lower cleats are now in, the glue's set, the screws are in, our cross braces installed, the pocket hole screws are in, so we can put our subtops in that are going to hold our containers, and they'll slip in just like this. Just like that. And our little litter box will go there, and our container for our potting soil will go right there. So the next step is to build the tops. Well, we've made some excellent progress. We're really moving along on this garden bench. The next step is to make some solid glued up tops, and we need to make the top with the grate, with the spaces between it for right here. The other thing we need to do is we need to put in our shelf pieces on the bottom. And all of that is really going to tie this unit together and make it solid as a rock. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and really thank you for watching this one.